Hi everyone, my name is Mala and I'm the Director of Tech for Social Good at a tech company called GitHub. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about compensation at big publicly traded tech companies, primarily for those people coming from nonprofits or INGOs. This video will not help you negotiate for a better offer, but it will instead help you decipher the major parts of a compensation package and some of the basic things to consider when switching sectors. Now, those of you who work in tech probably know what GitHub is, but if you don't, GitHub is where more than 90 million software developers in nearly every country in the world write, manage, and collaborate on code. GitHub is a big tech company that's headquartered in San Francisco and is owned by Microsoft. Now, I live in New York City and I've worked full-time for GitHub since April 2019. Prior to that, I worked in tech for international development at the United Nations and a few INGOs and small private companies. Alright, a few disclaimers. First, the opinions expressed in this video are strictly my personal views, not that of GitHub, Microsoft, or any of my future employers. Second, the information I provide in this video is mostly based on my personal experience working at a Microsoft-owned company. It doesn't apply to every tech company, especially those that are not publicly traded. And third, I cannot take any personal responsibility for the outcomes of anyone using the information in this video. So most big tech companies have three major parts to their full-time employee compensation: base salary, bonus, equity. Now the base salary is the most straightforward part. It's how much you are guaranteed to make per year, assuming you work at the company all year. Most nonprofits and INGOs wrap their entire compensation into a base salary. In the tech industry, bonuses are performance-based and are typically paid out once a year or in halves about every 6 months. They're calculated in ranges. For example, let's say that you make a base salary of $100,000 and in your job level, you're eligible for a bonus of 0 to 10% of your base salary. Now, if you got your full eligible bonus, $100,000 times 10% is $10,000. So your full bonus would be $10,000 and paid once a year on a set date or in halves depending on the company. Now some companies have both a regular and an exception range for bonuses, so if you did really well at your job that year and hit the exceptional range, you would get more than $10,000 for your bonus. So the third major part of a tech company compensation is equity. Now this is the hardest part to understand, so I'm going to take the most time to explain it. If a company is public, that means the shares of the company are traded on the stock market. Anyone living or residing in a country that can access that stock exchange on which the company stock is traded can buy one or more shares of the company. Now, if you buy or are given a share of the company, you literally own part of that company. How many shares you own determines how much of the company you own, which is called equity. Now, if you multiply the number of shares you own with the share price, you get the value of your equity. Over time, equity can be a big part of tech company employee compensation. For example, you may have the same job at a tech company for 10 years and your annual base salary may average at $100,000. Now, $100,000 times 10 years is $1 million. Over that same 10 years, you might be awarded equity that's valued at $400,000. Now, typically an employee will be offered equity when they start at the company, and each year they may be awarded more equity as part of their performance review alongside their cash bonus. For example, let's say that when you start at the company, your offer includes $25,000 of stock and the share price of the company is $100. $25,000 divided by $100 is 250 shares. Let's say that you receive another $25,000 of shares each year you're at the company. If the share price stays constant, you get another 250 shares every year. Now here's where equity gets more complicated. Shares have an award date and a vest date. The award date is when you can accept to receive the shares and when the price per share is calculated. The vest date is when you actually get the shares. However, let's say that the share price drops to $90 by the vest date. That means your equity is now worth less at $90 per share. The second complication is that equity is typically split over years and awarded each yearly, quarter, or half. Your award may be split over 4 years and in quarterly payments. So 4 years times 4 quarters per year equals 16 payments. Now remember, the value of that equity is determined by the share price. So if your company is doing well and the share price goes up by each vest date, the value of your shares will go up as well. Likewise, if the share price goes down by each vest date, your equity would be worth less. So as you can imagine, if you're awarded a different amount of equity every year and the share price changes at each award date, calculating what you get each year can be challenging. So to help resolve that, most companies have a tracker for employees, and I recommend becoming familiar with that tool to understand your equity value year to year. Alright, so to recap, big tech company employee compensation comes in 3 parts: base salary, bonus, equity. Your base salary is what you're guaranteed to make. Your bonus and equity are variable. Bonuses are typically in cash and paid out once or twice a year. Your equity is shares of your company stock, typically paid out over 4 or 5 years and at every yearly, quarter, or half. Now that we've covered what composes tech company compensation, here are a few things to keep in mind. Number 1, taxes. This is especially important for people coming from the United Nations or other organizations that don't levy taxes on all or some salaries. In the United States, the tax rate for your base salary is usually lower than the rate for your bonus and equity. This is because the latter two are considered supplemental income, which bumps them into a higher tax bracket. For example, if someone's entire compensation was a base salary of $250,000, they would keep more after taxes than someone who made $170,000 in base salary plus another $80,000 in bonus and equity. Like regular compensation, supplemental tax rates are subject to federal, state, and city taxes here in New York, and that may result in you getting half or less of your supplemental income after taxes. Number 2, equity payouts over time. In most companies, you must have been employed full-time for at least a year to be eligible to receive equity. This does not include in time you spend as a contractor. So if you take a job because of the equity compensation, make sure it's a role that you want and it'll be around for at least a year. Now, related to that, most big tech companies reward loyalty. The longer you are at a tech company, the more equity you're likely to get. Number 3, other bonuses. Earlier this year, the economy was so strong that some companies were offering massive signing bonuses and were willing to match unvested equity from a previous employer. That may happen again in the future. However, I've already seen a massive reduction of those extra bonuses as inflation stays high and as the Fed raises interest rates. Number 4, other benefits. In so many ways that's beyond the scope of this video, the way that the social sector does and does not invest in its staff is very different than big tech companies. So before evaluating an offer, make sure you understand the other benefits the company provides, like learning stipends, health insurance, paid time off, and growth opportunities. Number 5, salary ranges. The UN and many INGOs typically split their salaries by international and local staff and by years of experience. I have a lot of thoughts on that I will also not cover in this video, but one benefit of non-consultant UN salaries is transparency. Since those salary ranges are preset and public, it's straightforward to know how much someone should get paid. In the tech industry, salary ranges are huge and depend on where and in which country you're based, the years of experience, the level, the need and specialty of the skill set, and yes, sometimes bias and discrimination do influence compensation. Lastly, some roles like in sales and customer service are commission-based and are therefore structured differently. Number 6, equity value. Now again, this video is mostly about publicly traded companies, but there are far more tech companies that are privately owned. Staff of those companies tend to have a higher equity stake, but whether that equity is or will be worth money is far less certain. That said, a lot of people get into the tech industry precisely to take a bet on a company in case it goes public, called IPO for initial public offering, or is bought by another company. And that was the case as GitHub was acquired by Microsoft. Now I joined GitHub after the acquisition, but my colleagues who were there before and had equity did very well. The GitHub to Microsoft conversion was enough for them to buy new houses or to set up huge university funds for their kids or to set up big retirement funds for themselves. All right, well, that's all for me. That was a lot of info, so I recommend listening to this video a few times to get all the details. Good luck in your compensation research and negotiation. And if you want to learn more about my work at GitHub, visit malakumar.com or socialimpact.github.com. Thanks for listening. Alright, if you've ever watched the show Shark Tank, you're probably familiar with the term equity. Now, if not, equity basically means how much of a company you own. For example, if there are 1 million shares of a company and you own 10,000 shares, you own 1% of the company, because 10,000 divided by 1 million is 1%. Now, in reality, publicly traded numbers are much larger. For example, Microsoft has nearly 8 billion shares outstanding. The stock market isn't doing great at the time I filmed this video, but even at the current price per share of around $229, owning 1% of all Microsoft stock would mean that you have $17 billion worth of stock. So obviously, when we talk about employee equity, we're talking about very, very small fractions of 1%, but those small fractions are still worth a lot.